The first thing I heard was the click. Clean, metallic, deliberate. It came through the cemetery wind the second before I saw him, and even now I think that sound reached me before the danger did. My heels sank into the soft April ground as I crossed the hill toward my father's grave. The funeral had ended an hour earlier. The priest was gone. My aunt had finally stopped squeezing my wrist. The flowers still looked staged, too bright against the black soil. And around the raw rectangle of earth, 15 men in black had gone down on one knee like they were bowing to a king buried beneath it. My father had been a trauma surgeon from Bridgeport, not a king. The man standing at the head of the grave flicked a silver lighter shut and slid it into his palm. Tall, dark coat, no umbrella, though the sky had started to spit cold rain. The other men pretended stillness the way armed men do, every inch of them quiet except the readiness. I stopped 3 steps from the headstone. "Who are you?" I asked. No one answered, except the wind slipping through the cypress trees. Then the man stepped forward. His face was all severe lines and controlled stillness, the kind that made the world around him arrange itself. Dark hair, dark eyes, a scar cut pale through one eyebrow. He looked at me like he already knew the next 5 minutes better than I did. "Dante Salvatore," he said. The name should have meant nothing to me. It didn't, not fully, but I knew enough Chicago to understand the reaction that ran through the men behind him when he spoke. Not fear. Something quieter. Something quieter. Worse. My throat tightened anyway. "You're at the wrong grave." His gaze shifted to the mound of fresh earth. "No? I'm exactly where I should be." He reached down, set a glass prayer candle beside the flowers, and lit it. There was that click again. The flame caught. Rain hissed softly on the plastic funeral ribbons. I looked at the men in black kneeling around my father's grave and then back at him. "Did you know him?" His answer came without decoration. "He saved my life." I laughed once. It came out brittle. "My father spent 30 years saving lives. You'll have to be more specific." Something moved in his expression then. Not offense, memory. "He took a bullet out of me in his own garage," he said. "No questions. No police. No payment." A pulse of dizziness hit me so quickly I had to lock my knees. "No." "He did." "You're lying." "No." He said that word the way a judge might say sentence. Flat. Final. My father repaired old radios on Sunday afternoons. He overwatered basil. He cried once during a documentary about migrating whales and denied it after. He did not pull bullets out of Mafia men in his garage. Rain slid down the back of my neck. I looked at the mound of soil again, at the polished shoes too close to the grave edge, and something sharp went through me. "Move back," I said. No one moved. I knelt before I could think better of it, sank my bare fingers into the wet dirt, and smoothed the collapsing corner where one of the kneeling men's shoes had broken the edge. The soil was still loose, still tender from the burial. I pressed it back carefully, reshaping it around the flower stems. "Don't put your weight there," I said, not looking up. He was just buried. Silence gathered. Thick. Strange. When I finally lifted my head, every one of those men was staring at me. Not because I had raised my voice, because I hadn't. Dante Salvatore looked down at my dirt-streaked fingers, then at the grave, then at my face. Something unreadable crossed his eyes. It did not soften him. It made him more dangerous. "You should have gloves," he said. "My father's in the ground." It was not an answer. Somehow it answered him anyway. He crouched in front of me with terrifying precision, coat falling open just enough for me to catch the black grip of a gun under his shoulder. He took a folded white handkerchief from his pocket and held it out. I did not take it. His mouth changed by a fraction. Stubborn. "I don't know you." "Not yet." The cemetery bell tolled once from the church downhill. I stared at the cloth between us. Finally I took it, wiped my fingers, and hated that my hands shook harder after he saw them. "What do you want from me?" His gaze held mine. "Nothing." It was the first lie he told me. One of the kneeling men rose and approached. He murmured something in Italian. I only caught 2 words, macchine nera. Black car. Dante listened without looking away from me. Then he said, "How long have you been alone?" "I'm not alone." A black sedan idled at the cemetery gates. A second one sat farther down the road, engine running. I had noticed them because grief makes you notice stupid things. The exact fold of a priest's sleeve, the smell of carnations turning sweet in the cold, the way strangers park when they don't mean to be remembered. Dante stood. "You are now." I rose too quickly, the world swaying once beneath me. "If this is some kind of performance for whatever debt you think you owe my father, it's over. He's buried. Leave him alone." His jaw set. The men who killed him are not finished. My skin went numb. He had a heart attack. No. He glanced at the headstone. He had a staged arrhythmia after his medical files were altered and his home office was searched. I heard the sentence. My body refused it. No. He left something behind. They didn't find it. They think you know where it is. I stepped back. I don't. Maybe you don't. The wind lifted the funeral ribbon off one of the wreaths. It slapped wetly against the stake and then against my calf. I could not seem to draw a full breath. Who killed him? His answer was colder than the rain. A man I intend to bury. I should have run then. I know that now. But there are moments when fear is so large it becomes stillness instead. I stood in wet grass, dirt under my nails, staring at the man who spoke about vengeance like weather. He looked past me toward the gates. The line in his shoulders changed. "Get her in the car," he said. No one touched me. "Not yet. I'm not going anywhere with you." His eyes came back to mine, steady as locked iron. "Your father made me promise that if his choices ever reached your door, I would get there first." "I don't care what he made you promise." "I do." That landed harder than if he had shouted. I thought of my father's tired hands, his coffee rings on old journals, the locked drawer in his office I had never opened because he had once asked me not to. I thought of the cardiologist's explanation. Natural causes, tragic timing. I thought of my father's face the week before he died. More distracted than frightened, but not by much. The black sedan at the gates began to move. Dante saw it first. Of course he did. His hand came to the middle of my back, not rough, not gentle. Absolute. Men around us rose as one, jackets opening, bodies turning. I froze at the heat of his palm through my coat. "Listen carefully, little keeper," he said, low enough that only I heard it. "If you want to hate me, do it somewhere bulletproof." The first shot cracked through the rain and hit marble. He moved before the sound finished. I never remembered leaving the grave, only the violence of being folded behind him, the hard shelter of his body, men shouting in Italian, dirt kicking against my stockings as he drove me downhill toward the waiting car. The candle he had lit tipped and rolled once in the mud, flame somehow still alive behind the glass. A hand yanked the back door open. I was pushed inside, breathless, stunned, smelling wet wool and cold metal. Dante ducked in after me and slammed the door. The cemetery vanished behind black glass as the locks dropped. The gate shut behind me. The Salvatore estate did not look like the kind of place where people disappeared. That was its first trick. It sat behind stone walls and wrought iron gates on the north shore, all old money windows and clipped hedges and warm lantern light. The gravel drive curved past a fountain I could hear before I saw it. Nothing about it said criminal empire. Everything about it said money. Careful enough to become architecture. The second trick was inside. A man in a charcoal suit opened the front doors before the car fully stopped. He had sandy brown hair, kind eyes, and the defeated posture of someone who had been born to be exasperated. "Please tell me none of you bled on the seats," he said. "Marta had them detailed this morning and she already hates me." Dante got out first. "John, yeah." "That means yes," the man sighed. Then he saw me, took in my cemetery black dress, the dirt on the hem, and visibly corrected his face. "Sorry. Bad timing for my personality. I'm Johnny." I stepped out because sitting still felt like surrender. "Elena, condolences," he said softly. Also, if you hear honking in the morning, it's not a security alarm. We have geese." I stared at him. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They're decorative. I personally think they're agents of the devil." Under any other circumstances, I might have laughed. As it was, a startled breath escaped me before I could stop it. Dante's gaze touched my face for half a second, as if he had registered the sound and filed it somewhere. Inside, the house smelled like lemon oil, old wood, and something rich from the kitchen: garlic, tomato, bread. My grief made it obscene. My father had died 3 days ago. There should not have been a house on earth warm enough to smell alive. A woman in navy scrubs waited at the base of the staircase, arms folded. "I'm Rosa," she said. "Let me see your hands." I looked down, startled to find the skin across my knuckles split from the gravel at the cemetery. I hadn't even felt it. "I'm fine." Rosa gave me a look that suggested she buried optimism for sport. That wasn't a request. Dante took off his coat, handed it to Johnny, and said, "Guest room at the east end. Post men at the terrace in the service drive. No staff leave tonight." "I live here," Johnny muttered. "No staff," Dante repeated. Johnny lifted both hands. "I'm a decorative vase." Understood. I should have said something then. About being treated like a package. About the fact that no one had actually asked whether I intended to stay. Instead, I followed Rosa down a hallway lined with black and white photographs, and tried not to notice how every locked door looked expensive. The guest room was larger than my apartment. Not the apartment I'd had in college. My actual apartment now, above the conservation studio where I spent my days repairing cracked bindings and lifting old stains from paper fibers so delicate they almost breathed under my tools. I thought of the tray I had left soaking on my work table. The fellowship letter tucked in my kitchen drawer. Florence in September. A life that, 12 hours ago, still belonged to me. Rosa cleaned my hands with alcohol that stung sharp and bright. "You can leave when Dante says you can leave." I met her eyes in the mirror. "That's not how leaving works. In this house it is. You're very calm about kidnapping. You haven't seen kidnapping." That should have frightened me more than it did. Maybe shock had started calcifying around my nerves. When Rosa left, I found my bag already placed on a chair. Someone had zipped it closed. My father's rosary lay on top, coiled like a question mark. I picked it up and sat on the edge of the bed, because suddenly standing felt too ambitious. There was a knock. Not polite. Rhythmic. "Come in." Johnny entered carrying a tray with soup, bread, and a bottle of water. "Peace offering," he said. "Marta says if you don't eat, Dante will become unbearable and that somehow becomes her problem." "I'm not hungry." "Marta says grief burns glucose." Her exact words were less medical and more threatening. He set the tray down and looked around as though checking for hidden cameras, which, given the house, was probably not a joke. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about your father. He patched Enzo up once too. Enzo got stabbed in a parking lot because he's incapable of minding his business. Was my father secretly running a side clinic for criminals?" Johnny considered. "Secretly implies not everybody knew." Despite myself, I smiled. Small, brief, real enough for him to see. "Ah," he said, pointing at me. "There she is, human. Good, makes this easier." "What is this?" "The part where I tell you 2 things. He held up a finger. "First, the boss is terrifying, but not with women. Second, if you hear flapping at dawn, do not open the garden doors. Last week, one of the geese chased me into the fountain and Marta laughed so hard she had to sit down. Why are there geese? Because God is cruel. When he left, I ate half the soup without tasting it. An hour later, I found Dante in what must have been his office, because the room held the kind of silence people protect. Dark shelves, a bar cart untouched, 2 lamps, city lights beyond long windows. He stood with one hand braced on the desk, speaking low into a phone. The moment he saw me in the doorway, he ended the call. "You should be in your room. You should be in prison." He did not smile. I had a strange feeling he almost respected that. "I need to go home," I said. "No. My father's house has already been searched twice." I stared. "By you?" By men who would have taken you out of that cemetery trunk first if I'd been 10 minutes later. The room seemed to shrink on that sentence. You don't get to decide for me. I already did. Anger arrived then, hot enough to cut through grief for a second. You cannot walk into a cemetery, drag me out at gunpoint, bring me to your fortress, and start speaking in verdicts. He came around the desk. Not fast. He never seemed to hurry, which made it worse. You're here because your father died protecting something from men who now believe you can lead them to it. He stopped an arm's length away. Until I know what he hid, you stay. My pulse tripped, and if I say no, his eyes lowered once to the rosary still wrapped around my wrist, then came back to my face. Then I come find you. That should have sounded like a threat. It did. It also sounded like a promise I was suddenly afraid to test. I hated that I noticed his hands, the stillness in them, the fact that nothing about him looked restless even when the entire room bent around his control. I had a life, I said too quietly. His answer was almost gentle, which was somehow worse. I know, no speech, no apology, just that. He crossed to the door, opened it, and waited, not touching me, not needing to. When I passed him, he said, "Sleep if you can, little keeper." I stopped at the threshold. Don't call me that. His voice stayed level, then stopped trying to hold together things already under attack. I should have answered. I didn't. Behind me, the lock turned. Morning at the Salvatore estate began with gunmetal sky, coffee strong enough to strip varnish, and a goose slamming its body against the terrace glass while Johnny cursed in 2 languages. I had been awake since 5. Sleep in that house came in shards. Every creak sounded chosen. Every passing footstep made me count exits. The marble floor was cold enough to ache through my bare feet when I left the guest room. I found the kitchen by Santa Lona espresso, toasted bread, rosemary potatoes, butter. Marta Esposito, who looked like she had once broken a man's wrist with a wooden spoon and enjoyed the memory, set a cup in front of me without asking what I took. "You are too thin," she said. "I buried my father yesterday. So eat while grieving. It is more efficient." Johnny stumbled in through the side door, coat askew, hair windblown. That creature looked me in the eye before charging. "That's not an animal. That's a vendetta." Marta didn't even turn. If you ate bread instead of pretending to be a carb martyr, you could outrun poultry. I'm cultivating discipline. You're cultivating a personality defect. I nearly choked on my coffee. Johnny pointed at me triumphantly. "See?" She laughs. "Proof I'm essential." "You're loud," Marta said. "That is not the same thing." Dante entered to silence, so complete it felt trained. Even Marta lowered her voice by instinct. He wore a dark suit with no tie, a shoulder holster under the jacket, and the look of a man who had already made decisions other people would only learn by surviving them. His gaze found me first. There was a leather-bound book on the counter beside my cup. I recognized it before I touched it. My father's missal, the one he had carried to church every Easter and never let anyone repair because he said age deserved to show. "Where did you get that?" "Your house," Dante said, from a false panel in his desk. I stood so fast the chair legs scraped. "You broke into my father's house. I opened a locked room before somebody uglier did." I picked up the missal. The spine was cracked. Water damage at the edges. A section near the back bowed subtly, wrong for the paper block. Wrong enough that my hands knew it before my mind did. "What?" Dante asked. I ran my thumb over the hinge. This was resewn. Meaning whoever repaired it added material. I looked up. Not a lot. Just enough to hide something. The room changed. Rosa lifted her head from the end of the table. Enzo Ricci, whom I hadn't seen enter, shifted near the door. His face was scarred, his suit plain, his eyes unexpectedly kind. Dante pulled out a chair for me. "Show me." I should have refused. Instead, I sat because the book was in my hands. And work was the only language my body still trusted. Johnny fetched my repair kit from my bag after I described it microspatula. Bone folder, tweezers, magnifier. I heard his murmured, "This feels weirdly like arts and crafts before a homicide." And Marta smacked the back of his head. I opened the missile on a linen cloth. My fingers steadied as soon as I touched tools. That was the mercy of skill. It could carry you for a while when emotion could not. "There," I said, pointing. "See the swell? That thread isn't original." Dante came around behind me, not close enough to touch, close enough that I felt the temperature of him. Cold air from outside clung to his coat, sandalwood, smoke, something darker beneath it. I slid the microspatula under the paste down and eased the paper out by fractions. The room had gone silent except for the kettle clicking on the stove and the distant, enraged honk of a goose. Johnny no longer trusted. A small oilskin packet slipped from the spine into my palm. No one breathed. Inside was a flattened bullet and a strip of folded tracing paper. My mouth went dry. The bullet had a tiny cross carved near the casing rim. Dante went still in a way that made everyone else in the room stiller. "What is it?" I whispered. His voice came lower than before. "The mark belongs to my uncle." No one said the name. They didn't need to. I unfolded the tracing paper. Lines, columns, dates. Initials. Not a full ledger, more like a key. My father's handwriting, compressed and careful. At the bottom, one sentence. "If this reaches Elena, trust no Salvatore completely, not even the one I saved." The kitchen seemed to drop half an inch. I read it twice because the first time didn't feel survivable. Johnny made a strangled noise. "Well, good morning to all of us." I looked up at Dante. He did not reach for the paper. That scared me more than if he had. "Say something," I said. He held my gaze. "Your father was a better man than I am." That was not denial. It was not quite confession either. For one terrible second, I saw another version of the story. The mafia boss who gets to the grave first because he knows why the man is dead. I pushed back from the table. "Get away from me." No one moved except Dante, and he moved backward. "Elena, you knew." My voice cracked on the word and hated me for it. "You knew my father was keeping things. You knew he was in danger. I knew he had one piece of something older than him. I didn't know Vittorio moved on him." "Vittorio?" "My uncle." The name sat in the kitchen like a blade. Enzo stepped forward, careful, palms empty. "Miss Bellini. If the doctor wrote that line, he wanted you cautious. Fair enough, but if the old man wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it out of the cemetery." Darkness rose behind my ribs anyway. Dante's eyes stayed on me. "Read the back." I almost refused. Then I turned the paper over. Another line, smaller. Written later, the ink more hurried. "He will not lie to protect your feelings. That is the only reason he may be worth trusting at all." My throat closed. No one in the room spoke. For the first time since the cemetery, I understood that my father had not stumbled accidentally into some monster's orbit. He had chosen, once, to save him. Worse, he had known exactly what he was. I put the tracing paper down very carefully. "Who is your uncle?" Dante answered without hesitation. "The man who taught me how to build this house. And the man I should have buried years ago." For one heartbeat, something in his face opened. Not enough to call it pain. Enough to know where it lived. Later, when I tried to explain that moment to myself, I remembered another thing instead. Being 8 years old, half asleep on the stairs, watching my father in the garage with blood on his forearms while a dark-haired stranger sat shirtless under a single lamp, silent through the stitches. I had thought it was a dream for years. Dante, he remembered the paper crane first. Pink. Folded badly by a child's hand, left on the workbench beside the iodine tray while Matteo Bellini dug a bullet out of Dante's side and told him, very calmly, that surviving was not the same thing as deserving survival. Elena had been the girl on the stairs. She still didn't know it. When he looked at her now, bent over her father's missile, with her fingers steady and furious, Dante understood two things at once. Matteo had hidden the key for her, and Vittoria would burn half the city to get it. He also understood a third thing he had no use for. He could still see dirt under her nails from the grave. When Enzo's phone buzzed, the older man looked at the screen and swore. Dante turned. What? Truck at the south gate, Enzo said. No driver. Engine running. Gianni exhaled. I hate when gifts arrive. The house alarm began to scream. Someone was already inside the walls. The alarm stopped as suddenly as it had started. That was worse. I had learned enough in 24 hours to understand that noise meant danger, and silence meant it had entered the room. Enzo barked orders into his earpiece and moved everyone off the kitchen line. Rosa shoved me toward the hallway. Johnny reached automatically for me too, but Dante got there first. His hand closed around my wrist, not hard, not tentative. His thumb hit the pulse there once, as if confirming I was real, and then he steered me through the house with that same terrible efficiency he brought to everything. What happened? I asked. No one touches the walls without permission. That clears up nothing. It's a bomb threat, Johnny called from behind us. Or produce delivery. Honestly, with my life, both are possible. Marta shouted from the kitchen. If that truck contains bad tomatoes, I'm killing someone myself. Even in fear, the sound almost unstitched something inside me. Dante took me into a smaller rear kitchen lined with copper pans and old stone. No windows. One back staircase, a single lamp over the butcher block island. The safe kind of room, I realized. The kind chosen by men who counted blast radius without appearing to. You stay here, he said. I'm done being told where to stand. You can be done later. He turned to leave. Did my father know what your uncle was? That stopped him. He did not face me at once. When he did, the lamp cut half his face in gold and left the other half in shadow. Yes. Then why would he save you? A muscle moved in his jaw. Because he found me bleeding on his floor and he was still your father. That answer reached somewhere beneath anger. Somewhere worse. The lights died. The room went black so complete I heard my own breathing change. From somewhere in the house came the heavy thunk of backup systems trying and failing to engage. Then a shot in the distance. Then another. I took one involuntary step backward and hit the stone counter. Don't move, Dante said, as if I could have. Then click. A spark bloomed. Tiny. Controlled. His silver lighter painted his face in copper and blade shadow. He held it low, not for drama, just enough to give the room edges. I realized only then that I had gripped my own forearm so hard my nails hurt. Breathe, he said. I am breathing. Not enough. He set the lighter on the counter, flame steady, and moved toward the door. Another shot. Closer. Glass shattered somewhere above us. I flinched. He turned back instantly. Stay behind me. The door burst inward before either of us reached it. Dante moved with a violence so fast it looked clean. One hand shoved me down behind the island. The other drew his gun. The shot he fired deafened the room. A man dropped in the doorway. Another shadow behind him. Dante hit the stone beside me with his shoulder as he fired again. Body between mine and the opening. I smelled cordite. Hot metal. The raw mineral scent of dust shaken from old beans. Then it was over. That was the most frightening part of him, I think. Not rage. Efficiency. The second man had fled. The first lay half in, half out of the doorway, blood working across the tile. Dante stood above him, breathing hard through his nose, gun still trained, expression blank in the worst possible way. I had never seen a human body become evidence that quickly. You're bleeding, I said. He looked down as if the fact were administrative. A line of red ran from beneath his cuff where glass must have caught him. Surface. I got up because sitting there while he bled felt impossible. Let me see. No. Dante. His gaze cut to mine. The use of his name landed somewhere visible. Another gunshot sounded far off. Men shouting. Footsteps on the upper hall. But for one suspended second, the room held only the little flame on the counter and the blood at his wrist. I said, let me see. He extended the arm. I tore a dish towel, wrapped it around the cut, and tied it tighter than necessary because my hands were trembling and I didn't know what else to do with them. He did not pull away. His skin was warm. The tendons in his wrist shifted under my fingers. When I looked up, he was watching me with a stillness so complete it made my mouth go dry. I became aware of everything at once. The dark, the lamp-dead room, the dead man by the door, the lighter flame, my body too close to his. This was one of those moments that could have tipped. It didn't. His free hand came up, stopped at my face, and changed course at the last second, settling on the edge of the counter beside me instead. Restraint so obvious it felt like impact. "Why did your father keep the bullet?" I whispered. Dante's eyes shifted to the tiny flame on the counter, because he believed one day I'd have to decide whether I was still the man who carried it. "And are you?" He looked back at me. For the first time, there was no shield over the answer. "I don't know." That frightened me in an entirely new way. Enzo appeared in the doorway with 2 armed men at his back. He took in the body on the floor, my hands at Dante's wrist, the dark kitchen, and tactfully focused on none of it. "Truck was a distraction," he said. "Power cut from the external line. 2 inside the grounds, 1 down, 1 gone." Dante's voice dropped back into command. "Sweep the west wing again. Double the gate." Enzo nodded and left. I finished knotting the towel. When I tried to step away, Dante's fingers closed lightly around mine. Not enough to hold. Enough to stop. He looked at the blood on my knuckles from my father's grave, dried there in dark crescents, and then at the fresh red on the towel around his wrist. "Your father stitched me in a garage," he said. "He made me swear that if his world and mine ever collided, yours would not pay for mine." I waited. He should have asked a better man. The words sat between us like an opened vein. Then Johnny stuck his head through the half-ruined doorway and said, "Good news. The geese attacked one of the intruders. Bad news. I may have to respect them now." I made a broken sound that was too close to laughter and too close to crying at once. Dante's hand released mine. The generator kicked in. Light flooded the room. The flame of the lighter became ordinary again. Nothing in me did. He let go first. After the attack, the house became quieter. Not safer. Quieter. There is a specific silence in places run by armed men after violence. The silence of radios turned low, of shoes that stopped squeaking, of doors opened only wide enough. Even the staff moved differently. Marta cooked with more force. Rosa counted bandages like prayers. Johnny whispered as if the walls had earned his respect at last. I spent the afternoon in my father's study, not the one in his house. Dante had 1 room on the 2nd floor cleared for me and filled with everything they'd taken from my father's office before the police could misfile it or somebody else could burn it. File boxes, notebooks, medical journals, a fountain pen with a cracked cap. His reading glasses. The sight of them on the desk nearly ended me. Rosa found me with my forehead against a banker's box. "You can hate him and still use the room," she said. I wiped my face too quickly. "I'm not crying." "Then your eyes are ambitious." She set a mug of tea beside me and leaned against the doorframe. "Your father used to argue with Dante." I looked up. "About what?" "Everything. Blood pressure. Sleep. The fact that some men confuse control with health." "That sounds like my father." Rosa nodded. He liked him anyway. I almost asked why. Then I saw something under the bottom stack of journals, a cream envelope I did not recognize. My name on the front in my father's handwriting. My stomach dropped. I opened it with a letter knife from the tray. Inside was a single sheet and a luggage claim ticket from O'Hare dated 2 weeks before his death. "Elena, if I did this right, you will only ever read this if I failed. I am sorry for that first." The room tilted around the edges. He wrote that he had been pressured to surrender patient records tied to gunshot extractions from 12 years earlier. Not names. Dates. Wound trajectories. Enough to prove who had been shot in a warehouse on Halstead the night an old alliance fractured. Enough to prove someone inside the Salvatore family had ordered friendly fire, to reshape succession. I kept copies because good men die when bad men control the record of what happened. My hands shook harder. At the bottom, a note, the baggage ticket opens a locker. Do not go alone. If Dante Salvatore reaches you first, make him earn what I once gave freely. I laughed once under my breath. A sad, furious thing. Of course, my father would leave instructions like a challenge. When Dante came in, I had the letter in one hand and the claim ticket in the other. He stopped when he saw my face. What happened? I found the part where my father trusted you exactly enough to be inconvenient. I handed him the page. He read fast. Then more slowly. When he got to the ticket, something shuddered in his expression. That locker is already compromised if Vittorio knew to push him this hard. Then we go now. No. That word again, his favorite weapon. I stood. You do not get to decide which pieces of my father I recover. I decide whether you live long enough to recover them. Before I could answer, Ziani burst in carrying 2 paper bags and looking offended by existence. If anyone asks, this is not emotional eating, this is tactical protein acquisition. He stopped. Looked at the letter. Looked at us. I'm sensing no one wants almond flour muffins. Leave, Dante said. Johnny set the bags down carefully. For the record, Marta made those because she heard Miss Bellini hadn't eaten lunch. And if they go stale, she'll take it personally and maybe kill me. So whatever war crimes happen in here, please include snacks. When he left, the room loosened by half an inch. I faced Dante again. We're going. His gaze held mine. With me. With a team. With routes locked before we move. That surprised me enough that I hesitated. He noticed. Do you think I'm trying to keep your father from you? He asked quietly. I think I don't know what you're trying to keep. Something in his face shifted hurt, perhaps, or only the recognition that he had earned the question. We went at dusk. O'Hare's long-term baggage wing smelled like floor polish, jet fuel, and tired strangers. Enzo walked ahead. Johnny behind us, muttering that airports were germ theaters. Dante stayed at my shoulder, not touching. The almost of him was worse than touch had been. Locker C19 opened with the claim ticket and a key taped behind it. Inside, a small fireproof pouch, 1 cassette tape, and a folded restaurant receipt. Seriously, Johnny said. Your father hid evidence in a place with Auntie Anne's nearby. Respect. Back at the house, I used a low-heat spatula and magnification lamp to lift a second layer from the restaurant receipt. Invisible writing bloomed in diluted gall ink beneath the order total. Coordinates. A date. 1 word. Ferrante. The room went dead still. Luca Ferrante was Dante's consigliere, the man who had brought me books from my father's house and told the staff not to move the pencil cup because grief notices missing things. Betrayal didn't confirm itself. It breathed in the corner. Dante stared at the receipt. His voice, when it came, had gone so quiet the air felt sharpened by it. No one says his name outside this room. Maybe my father meant something else, I said, even though my own body had already begun refusing the lie. Maybe, Dante said, but he was already reaching for his gun. Someone had sold our breathing room. War announced itself before midnight. Not with explosions, with absence. Luca Ferrante never came home. Phones went unanswered. Safe apartments came up empty. 2 cash houses were found stripped. By 1 in the morning, armed men were moving through the estate like the house had become a loaded chamber and nobody knew who was already inside it. Rosa found me halfway down the back staircase with my shoes in one hand and my father's cassette tape in the other. Tell me you're sleepwalking, she said. I'm looking for Dante. At 1 in the morning? I held up the cassette. My father left a tape. Rosa's mouth tightened. She glanced past me toward the dark hall, listening to the house breathe around us. Somewhere outside, tires hissed over wet gravel. Somewhere else, a radio whispered in Italian and cut off. He's in the chapel. Of course he was. Men like Dante Salvatore did not pray in public. The private chapel sat behind the west wing, old stone and dark wood, small enough to feel secret, and old enough to feel unforgiving. I opened the side door and the scent met me first. Cold wax, incense trapped in the walls. rain on stone. The sanctuary lamp burned red beside the altar. Dante stood in the first pew with his head bowed and his coat still on, like he did not expect to stay long. At the soft scrape of the door he turned. The silver lighter gleamed once in his hand before he closed his fist over it. "You shouldn't be out of your room. I'm starting to think you built this house to say that sentence." His gaze dropped to the cassette. "What is it?" My father's voice, maybe, unless he left me a lecture on proper filing systems. I held out the tape. He didn't take it right away. That had become one of the ways I measured him, what he did not rush toward. "There's a player in the sacristy," he said at last. The tape deck looked older than I was. Dustless. Maintained. We stood shoulder to shoulder while Dante fed the cassette in and pressed play. For a moment there was only hiss, then a scrape, a breath. My father. "If you're hearing this, Elena, then I was right to be afraid." I closed my eyes. His voice sounded tired, not frightened, resigned in the way good men become resigned when they have seen too much damage, and still decide to do one more decent thing before the end. I kept copies because the truth rots fastest where powerful men store it. The warehouse on Halstead was not an ambush from outside, it was ordered from within. A son was meant to die beside men who trusted his family. Beside me, Dante went so still I felt it in the air. If Vittorio reaches first, he will use blood the way lesser men use money. If Dante reaches first, the tape garbled, warped. A burst of static chewed through the sentence. My hands clenched. The voice returned in broken pieces. "Grow with paper hands." Static. "Remember the garage." More hiss. "He will tell you less than you deserve, but more than anyone else in his world." The tape cut out. No one spoke. I stared at the stopped spools. What happened in the garage? Dante leaned one hand on the cabinet. The chapel bells did not ring. The city did not intrude. It was just the two of us, and the dead man between us. "When I was 21, he said, my uncle sent me to a meeting on Halstead. He said it was a peace talk. My younger brother Nico came with me because he thought if he stood close enough, he could learn how to be me." He looked at the black plastic reel as if it had become the only thing in the room he could afford to see. It wasn't a peace talk. I waited. The first bullet hit Nico in the throat. The second should have hit me. I got out. Barely. His fingers curled once against the cabinet edge. "Your father pulled the bullet from my side in his garage, while I bled on his concrete, and his daughter watched from the stairs." A cold shiver moved down my spine. The dream. The lamp. The blood. The pink shape in my hand because I'd been folding paper at the kitchen table before I heard the noise downstairs. "I thought I imagined that," I whispered. "No." I looked at him then. Really looked. The scar under the ribline I had glimpsed when his shirt shifted in the dark kitchen. The pale mark through his eyebrow. The way grief lived in him like an organ. "My father trusted you because you survived it?" I asked. "No." His voice dropped. "He trusted me because I didn't ask him to lie about who I was." There was another sentence buried under that one. I could hear it even if he would not say it. The chapel door blew inward. The first man came low with a suppressor and a blade. Dante moved before I made sense of shape or sound. He shoved me behind the stone baptismal font hard enough that pain shot up my hip. Then he fired twice. The shots thundered in the chapel like blasphemy. A second man rushed from the side aisle. I saw the knife before Dante did. Instinct made me move. There was a brass candlestick on the ledge beside me. Heavy. Cold. I grabbed it and swung with both hands. It hit the intruder's wrist. Bone cracked. The knife hit the floor. Dante's next shot dropped him. The silence after was hot and ringing. Dante turned on me so fast I thought for one wild second he was angry I had touched the fight at all. Then his hands framed my face, searching, checking for blood. "Are you hit?" "I don't think so." "You don't think?" His hands were shaking. That frightened me more than the gunfire had. He realized it and pulled back immediately as if the loss of control itself offended him. His shoulder was bleeding through the suit near the seam. Not much. Enough. Sit down, I said. Elena, sit. Maybe it was the chapel. Maybe it was my father's voice still in the air. He sat on the front pew without arguing, and I tore linen from the altar credence cloth because I had lost any ability to care about sacrilege tonight. The cut was grazing, high on the shoulder. I pressed hard. He didn't flinch. Your brother, I said, because that was where my mind had snagged and stayed. How old was he? 19. My throat burned. I tied the linen off. My fingers brushed the line of muscle beneath his shirt. He caught my wrist then, not to stop me, to keep me there. The red sanctuary lamp painted his face in dim, blood-colored light. He looked exhausted for the first time since I had known him. Why me? I asked. And don't say debt. I'm tired of debt. His thumb pressed once to the pulse in my wrist. At the grave, you didn't ask who I was before you knew whether they'd damaged the soil over your father. 15 armed men around you, and you knelt in the mud to fix what their shoes had broken. My breath caught. No one in my world protects the dead before themselves, he said. You did. The chapel seemed to tip around us. You remember that. I haven't stopped. I should have moved. I didn't. His eyes dropped to my mouth and closed again. The smallest fracture in composure. Then he let go of my wrist. There it was again. The stopping. I heard myself say, if you leave me alone with this, I think I'll come apart. That cost more than anything I had said to him. His gaze lifted back to mine. Slow, careful, little keeper. It was the same nickname. It did not sound the same. When he kissed me, it was nothing like fear and too much like mercy. Not rough, not claimed. A pause that became a confession because neither of us stepped away. His hand came up to the side of my neck and stayed there as if he could feel every place I was trying not to shake. I kissed him back because not doing it would have been its own kind of lie. He broke it first. His forehead touched mine for one unbearable second. Then he stood and put distance between us like it hurt. Outside, alarms began to rise again. Footsteps, men shouting, Enzo's voice in the courtyard. Dante drew a breath and became himself in all the visible ways. They came inside consecrated walls. What does that mean? His expression turned to iron. It means Vittorio has stopped pretending this can be negotiated. He picked up the silver lighter from the pew where it had fallen and flicked it once, thinking. Click. The small sound cut through me. Then he looked at me with the last softness already gone. War has arrived. By morning, the estate no longer pretended it normal. Cars came and went before dawn. Men I had never seen took positions at the terraces and the outer wall. Enzo's arm was in a sling from a graze he had dismissed with insulting calm. Rosa had stopped asking whether I slept. Johnny drank espresso like revenge and kept muttering that stress made his face look soft around the jawline, which Marta informed him would remain true until he stopped eating emergency almonds at midnight. Dante did not mention the chapel kiss. That was almost worse than if he had. He moved through the house with a colder silence now, issuing orders, taking calls, disappearing into the security room with maps spread out under glass. If he looked at me, it was brief and careful and somehow more intimate than touch had been. By noon, I hated every room. Then Aunt Teresa called the secure line. I hadn't known anyone had given her the number. Her voice came thin with panic. Elena, the police released your father's effects from the hospital locker. There is a sealed packet for next of kin. I'm at St. Agnes. They won't keep it past 3. Don't move, I said. I'll. The line clicked, dead. Rosa took the receiver from my hand and looked at the caller display. That line should not be reachable. My stomach turned. She used a parish office transfer, Johnny said from the doorway. Or somebody used her. I have to go, I said. No, Rosa and Johnny said together. Dante would say the same thing, Rosa added. I'm not asking Dante. That was how my mistake began. Not with stupidity, with grief and impatience and the arrogant little hope that one more piece of my father might still be reachable if I moved fast enough. Enzo found me in the garage with my coat half on. "You are not sneaky," he said. "I'm going to St. Agnes." "No. Every man in this house learned that word from the same school." His scar tugged faintly, not quite a smile. "Probably," then gentler. "If there's a packet, I'll get it. It's for me. That is exactly why you are staying here." I should have listened. Instead, I said the most dangerous sentence available to me: "I'll go alone." Enzo swore under his breath. 10 minutes later, he was behind the wheel of an armored sedan with one young guard named Paolo in front and me in the back, furious enough to think anger counted as strategy. Chicago, in rain, looked like a city trying not to confess anything. St. Agnes sat on a quiet block of brick row houses and sycamores. The parish hall door stood open. Too open. Enzo saw it at the same time I did. "Stay down," he said. The first shot hit the windshield. Glass starred. Paolo yelled. Enzo hauled the wheel sideways and rammed the sedan against the curb to shield my side. A van burst from the alley. Men in black tactical coats moved fast. This wasn't a retrieval. It was a lesson. Paolo got out firing. He was 23 maybe. I knew that because he had told me in the garage that morning, grinning nervously, that he still lived with his mother because rent is for men with bad priorities. He dropped before I could even finish his name in my head. Enzo dragged my door open and shoved me behind the engine block. Gunfire split the street to pieces. Stone chipped off the church steps. Somewhere a woman screamed from a nearby house. "Run to the side gate on my mark," Enzo said. "I'm not leaving you. Today is not about your preferences." Blood soaked through his jacket near the ribs. The world narrowed. Rain. Gunsmoke. The metallic taste of fear. My own heartbeat punching at my throat. Then Dante's convoy turned the corner. It was not relief I felt first. It was terror, because I understood from the speed of the cars that he had known. Understood that he had probably known the moment the garage camera lost me, and now he was here in the street with murder already decided. What happened next would visit me in sleep for months. Dante stepped out before the SUV fully stopped. No yelling. No speeches, just movement. Precise. Lethal. He shot one man through the throat, crossed the hood, took another down behind the van, then went after the third with his bare hands when the gun jammed. Efficient, Rosa had called him. In the church rain, he looked like something older than efficiency, something stripped down to bone. When it was done, he came to me last. That hurt more than if he had shouted. He crouched in front of me, hands bloody, eyes unreadable. "Are you hit?" I couldn't answer. He checked anyway. Face, shoulders, collarbone. His palm at the back of my neck for a single second. Then he stood and turned to Enzo, who was pale but upright by force alone. "Get him to Rosa." "Paolo?" I heard myself ask. No one answered. Back at the estate, Dante didn't come to my room. He sent a passport, a plane ticket, and a slim envelope containing my Florence Fellowship acceptance packet with the date circled in black ink. At the bottom, in his handwriting, "You leave tonight. This is the last order I'll give you." I stared at it until the words blurred. Rosa dressed the cut on my temple, in silence. Finally, she said, "He's angry because Paolo is dead and Enzo almost joined him, not because you mattered less. That doesn't help. It's not meant to." At O'Hare, Aunt Teresa held my hand all the way to security. She smelled like cold cream and church wool and the life I had almost had. "Come with me to Naples for the summer," she said, "then Florence in September. You can still choose a clean life." Could I? At Gate C, they began boarding my flight. I could have stood. I could have walked down that corridor and let Italy turn Dante Salvatore into the kind of story women survive and never retell properly. Instead, I saw Paolo falling, Enzo bleeding. The packet that had never existed. The fact that Vittorio had learned I could be moved by family and used it like a key. And beneath all of it, another truth I hated for being true. If I left now, Dante would fight this war with one hand tied behind his back, because he would still be trying to keep it from reaching me. The old me would have called that his choice. The woman at Gate C understood it was mine too. I took out my phone and called Florence. My voice barely trembled when I declined the fellowship I had wanted for 4 years. Aunt Teresa cried in a way that made me feel 12. "Elena, don't do this. I'm already in it." Then I turned around, walked out of the airport, and hired a car back to the estate without telling anyone. When the gates opened, Johnny was standing in the drive-in socks, holding an umbrella and looking genuinely haunted. "You came back," he said. "I know." He looked upward as if appealing directly to God. "Marta is going to win every argument for the rest of my life." I almost smiled, almost cried. Instead, I walked past him, through the front doors and into the dark I had chosen with my own hands. I went back in. No one congratulated me for returning. That was one of the few mercies in the Salvatore house. Dante looked at me once in the front hall, rain still on my coat, the airport tag hanging from my bag like evidence. His face did not change. He said only, "You forfeited Florence." Yes. For this. For the truth. He held my gaze a second longer, then stepped aside to let me pass. No forgiveness. No warmth. Somehow that honesty steadied me more than comfort would have. Enzo was alive, though Rosa announced he was officially intolerable because he kept trying to stand up with stitches in his side. Paolo's mother had been brought to the estate. I heard her crying through 2 closed doors, and understood at last what it meant to be close to men like this. Grief did not stay in one house. It multiplied. I worked because the alternative was drowning. My father's cassette had warped from age and heat. The restaurant receipt had another layer of writing hidden under the first. A fragment of paper taken from Paolo's pocket held flecks of printing ink uncommon in office stock. By evening, I had covered one table in magnification lamps, blotters, distilled water, Japanese tissue, and tiny weighted snakes filled with lead shot. Johnny entered carrying a tray of tea and stared at the battlefield of my tools. "Every time I see your work table, I feel underducated." "I'm bridging tears," I said without looking up. "In paper? In everything." That made him quiet for a moment. Then he peered at the thin strip of translucent tissue I was laying over a split edge of the receipt. "It looks like it'll break." "It's strongest if I stop forcing the fibers flat," I said, "if I bridge them where they actually tore." He blinked. "That is either about paper or the saddest thing I've heard all week." I almost laughed. Both. Later, when he brought Dante coffee, I heard him say in the hall, "For what it's worth, boss, she's doing surgery with glue and emotional metaphors." Dante answered too low for me to catch. By midnight, the hidden text was clear. "South Canal Printworks. Basement plate room. Ferrante keeps the originals." I stared at the words until they stopped rearranging themselves. A soft knock sounded. Luca Ferrante entered in his immaculate gray suit, as composed as ever. He looked tired in a way I had not seen before. Human. That was the problem with betrayal. It rarely wore horns. "You found it," he said. I did not ask how he knew. "What originals?" His eyes went to the receipt under glass. "The warehouse records. Your father made copies of copies. The real ledger pages were pulled before the archive fire. I hid them." My pulse stumbled. "You?" He shut the door behind him. Carefully. "Yes." I stood slowly. "Why would you hide them if Vittorio wants them?" "Because I have spent 12 years trying to keep this family from becoming his reflection again." Again. "Then why run?" His expression changed by a degree. "Regret, maybe? Because Dante was always going to choose war over evidence once Paolo died. And war is where Vittorio wins." That might even have been true. Which made it more dangerous. "If you have the originals, tell Dante." "I can't." "Why not?" He took a breath. "Because my sister and her son have lived under Vittorio's eye for 7 years. Every move I make has been paid for in advance." The room went cold around the edges. I wanted simple betrayal. Treason, neat and hateful. What he gave me instead was worse. A man who had compromised himself so slowly he could still use the word necessity and mean it. You should have told him. Yes, you should have told me. That too. I thought of the books he had brought from my father's house, the way he had remembered my tea, the fact that he had once told a servant not to throw away the bent paperclip on my father's desk because daughters notice what fathers touch. I had trusted that kindness because it had looked ordinary. He stepped closer. Come with me to the printworks. We get the originals. We force Dante to use them before he spills the city open. I should have called for Enzo, or Rosa, or anyone. Instead, I looked at the restored text, at the one path that still led toward my father rather than away from him, and made my second mistake. Fine, I said. He did not smile. The South Canal printworks had been dead for years. Broken windows, rusted loading dock. The inside smelled like oil, mildew, and old paper left too long and damp. Ferrante led me through the press room by flashlight. Giant machines crouched in the dark like extinct animals. I kept one hand in my coat pocket around the small bone folder from my tool roll because it had become my idea of a weapon, which was absurd enough to almost be funny. The basement plate room was narrower, lined with metal drawers. Ferrante stopped by the last one. In there. I crouched to pull it open. That was when I heard the second pair of footsteps, not Ferrante's. I turned. Vittorio Salvatore stood in the doorway in a black overcoat, silver at the temples, elegance sharpened into cruelty. He looked enough like Dante to make my stomach drop and not enough to offer any comfort at all. Same eyes. Less soul. I hoped you'd be your father's daughter, he said. Curiosity is such a dependable leash. I stepped back. Luca? Ferrante didn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, he said. There it was. Not suspicion. Not warning. The actual blade. Vittorio lifted a gloved hand. 2 men moved in behind him. Search her. Ferrante said, no rough handling. Vittorio's gaze slid to him. You still confuse preferences with leverage. I did the only thing I could think to do. While the men closed in, I snapped the tiny bone folder in half against the drawer edge, palmed the sharpened shard, and scraped 3 quick letters into the paint beneath the metal lip where only someone kneeling would see it. EBL Elena Bellini, Luca. Proof I had been here. Proof of who brought me. A hand seized my arm. Another yanked my bag away. Vittorio watched me with almost affectionate contempt. Your father annoyed me, he said. He kept records as if truth mattered more than family. It does. Something like interest touched his face. Ah, that's why Dante kept you. He took Dante's silver lighter from Ferrante's hand, then as if he had lifted it from some earlier meeting, some earlier betrayal, and clicked it open just to watch me react. Tiny flame, tiny sound. I hated that he saw it. Lock her downstairs, Vittoria said. By dawn, Dante will come where I tell him. Ferrante looked at me once as the men dragged me past him. Grief sat in his eyes like a confession, too late to save anyone. The door shut above me. Too late had started. The room they locked me in had once held a boiler the size of a truck. Now it held rust, dripping pipes, a steel chair, and one high window fogged shut with years of grime. The air tasted of old iron and wet dust. Somewhere overhead, the printworks groaned whenever the wind hit the broken glass in the upper panes. I sat because panic wastes oxygen. That was something my father used to say in emergency rooms. Not kind. Useful. My wrists were tied in front, which meant either stupidity or underestimation. I worked the knot against the broken shard of bone folder I had hidden in my sleeve. Slow, tiny movements. Don't shred the skin before the rope gives. I heard men upstairs talking in low bursts. Laughter once. A chair scraped. Ferrante's voice, too blurred to make words of. By the time the rope loosened, my hands were wet with blood. I found a maintenance panel behind the old boiler and pried it open with the snapped shard. Inside, ancient wiring, dust, and one narrow utility crawl barely large enough to hold a desperate woman. I wriggled in, scraped both knees raw, and found another grate opening toward the hall. Vittorio was there. Not in the room. In the corridor beyond, speaking on a phone. I could only see the lower half of him through the slats, polished shoes, black hem, gloved hand. "He'll come," he was saying. Dante was always sentimental where debts are concerned. It's why Nico died first. The world stopped. He learned the wrong lesson from Halstead. Mercy is a leak in the hull. My stomach turned over so violently I had to brace one hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Nico died first. Not accidental crossfire. Not chaos. Chosen, Vittorio ended the call and walked away. His shoes clicked out of hearing. I stayed frozen long enough to hate myself for it. Then I crawled back out, found a coal pencil stub near the furnace base, tore a strip from my underskirt, and wrote 3 words before shoving the cloth into the steam pipe release valve, where escaping pressure would spit it into the hall if the system was jarred. Nico was chosen. That was all I had room for. When the first explosion came, it was small and close, more like a breached lock than a bomb. Men shouted upstairs. Gunfire cracked across the print room. I dropped behind the boiler instinctively, my heart slamming hard enough to bruise. Then came a voice I knew better than my own pulse. "Downstairs, Dante." The second shot was nearer. Boots thundered on metal stairs. Someone screamed. Someone else didn't get time to. The boiler room door burst inward. Ferrante stumbled through first, blood down the side of his neck, gun in hand. "Alana." I picked up the length of pipe I had found under the furnace grate and swung before I knew whether I meant to. It hit his forearm. His gun clattered away. He looked at me not angry, just tired clear through. "Good," he said hoarsely. "Don't trust me now." Dante hit the doorway half a second later. There are moments when a room stops being a room and becomes a verdict. He saw Ferrante bleeding, saw me with the pipe, saw the cut skin around my wrists, and something in his face went beyond rage into arithmetic. Ferrante lifted both hands. Vittorio went east through the plate room. He has 2 men and the originals. "Why should I believe you?" Dante asked. "Because I already paid for choosing wrong." There was blood on his shirt lower than the neck wound, too much of it. I found my voice. He said Nico was chosen. Everything in Dante went silent, not still, silent. Like the center of him had become a weapon so focused it no longer needed movement. Behind him, Johnny appeared with a rifle he carried like an insult to his manicure. He took one look at me and blurted, "You're alive." "Great, fantastic, I hate this basement and everybody in it." Even then, even there, I almost laughed. That was his gift. The world could be on fire, and somehow his face still said he had been personally inconvenienced by the apocalypse. Ferrante swayed. "My sister is already out. I sent the address to Enzo before you got here." Dante did not lower his gun. "Luca," I said. Ferrante met my eyes. "I liked your father," he said. "And you should know I never let Vittorio touch the books from his office." It was the most human apology available to him, and it broke something anyway. A shot cracked from the corridor. Ferrante jerked. Dante moved, firing back through the door. The man outside dropped. Ferrante sank to one knee. One hand pressed to his side. "Go," he said to Dante. "If you wait for a cleaner version of me, you'll lose her and the ledger both." For one beat, I thought Dante might shoot him himself. Instead, he stepped over the fallen gun, seized my hand, and pulled me to my feet. His fingers closed around mine so hard it hurt. Not careless. Desperate, we ran. The upper floor stank of powder and ink. One of the old presses had caught fire along the rollers, flames licking blue where oil fed them. Vittoria's men were already retreating through the loading dock. Enzo, gray-faced but upright, exchanged fire from behind a steel column. When he saw me, he looked relieved enough to make me want to apologize for the rest of my life. Outside, rain hammered the river slick black. Vittorio was stepping into a waiting car when Dante fired. The bullet shattered the rear window but didn't stop the sedan from fishtailing into the street and vanishing under the overpass. Dante stood in the rain, gun lowered by degrees. I had never seen a man look more dangerous or more alone. Then he turned, came back to me, and stopped with less than an inch between us. His hand went to the side of my face, bloody knuckles and all. I did not care. I leaned into it because I had just learned what his uncle had done to his brother, and because he had come for me anyway, and because there are moments when love begins before the word can stand. Upright in your mouth. Little keeper, he said, rough as torn cloth. I grabbed the front of his coat and held on. Behind us, Johnny said to no one and everyone, "If anyone asks, I was magnificent. Also, I would like a pastry and 12 hours of unconsciousness." No one laughed. But later, I would remember that line and breathe easier because of it. Enzo came in under the loading dock roof with a packet wrapped in oilskin. Ferrante tossed this before he went down. Inside were the original ledger pages, warehouse dates, payment routes, one signature repeated often enough to become a confession. Vittorio Salvatore. Dante looked at the pages. Then at the dark road where the sedan had disappeared. "He'll go back to Halstead," he said. "How do you know?" I asked. His gaze never left the road. "Because that's where he thinks family belongs when it needs killing." The rain came harder. This time, I knew exactly what we were running toward. The warehouse on Halstead looked abandoned enough to fool civilians. Broken skylights, corrugated steel walls eaten by rust, a chain-link gate hanging open by one hinge. But men like Vittorio preferred places that had once held industry and now held memory badly. There were too many ways to trap a body in a place built for freight. We arrived just before dawn. The city was the color of old coins. Cold wind moved off the river and pushed the scent of diesel, wet concrete, and something older from the warehouse interior dust. Machine oil. Dead paper. I sat in the back of Dante's SUV with the ledger pages on my lap and the restored cassette in a padded case at my feet. "You stay behind Enzo," Dante said. "No." He looked at me once, long enough to understand I had crossed too many lines of myself to become obedient now. "Then you stay where I can see you. That's not the same thing." It is today. Johnny, in a bulletproof vest he wore with active resentment, leaned into the open door and said, "For the record, I hate combat before breakfast. It creates terrible associations with omelets." Dante ignored him. "You're with Rosa." Johnny pressed a hand to his chest. "So I'm the disposable one." "You talk too much to be disposable," Rosa said, checking a sidearm with one-handed precision. Inside, the first floor was empty by design. Too clean. Too open. Vittoria wanted us walking deeper before the trap closed. Dante signaled left, then right. Men spread soundlessly between stacks of old pallets and tarp-draped machinery. The only noise was the soft grit under our shoes and, once, the thin clink of loose chain moving in the draft. I kept seeing the 19-year-old boy dying here before he had learned enough to distrust his own blood. At the center of the warehouse floor stood a single metal table under a hanging work lamp. On it, another prayer candle, unlit. Beside it, the flattened bullet from my father's missile. A message. Dante picked up the bullet. His thumb passed over the carved cross at the rim. He did not speak. He only flicked his lighter once and lit the candle. Click. The small flame steadied. Then the overhead speakers crackled. "Still dramatic," Vittoria's voice said. "I'm relieved." Gunfire erupted from the catwalk. Everything became movement. Men dropped behind crates. Glass rained from the upper skylight as Enzo returned fire. Rosa shoved me behind a steel support beam and fired upward with terrible calm. Johnny, somehow flat on the floor and still opinionated, shouted, "If I survive this, I'm eating bread again." The sound almost vanished under the shots. Dante moved through the crossfire as if the warehouse had taught his body the map years ago and never lost its hold. He knew where the blind corners lay, which conveyor pit still dropped under the east side, which stairwell bent around the furnace block. That frightened me until I understood, of course he knew. Boys who lived became men who memorized kill zones. I crawled to the overturned table where the cassette case had slid. A bullet had nicked the corner. The tape was still intact. My hands moved without permission, working the portable recorder Ferrante had left in the oilskin packet. Play. Rewind. Volume up. If Vittorio wanted an audience, I could give him one. I ran for the old control booth on the side platform, while Enzo cursed my name under his breath and covered me anyway. The booth still held a rusted PA system wired to the warehouse speakers. I connected the recorder with a cable barely holding together. On the floor below, Dante had reached the central stairs. Vittorio stepped into view above him, elegant even with a gun in hand. "You brought the girl," Vittorio called, sentimental to the end. Dante's answer came flat. "You chose Nico." "Of course I did. He was easier to love than you. Men like you survive and ask questions." I hit play. My father's damaged recording burst through the warehouse speakers in a wash of static. The warehouse on Halstead was not an ambush from outside. It was ordered from within. Every man still shooting under Vittorio's command heard it. Vittorio looked up sharply toward the booth. I didn't wait. I switched to the second file, a voice print I had found hidden on Ferrante's microreel, cleaned through the night with software Rosa's assistant downloaded while I repaired the tape housing. Ferrante's voice, controlled, precise. Vittorio authorized the Halstead correction. "If I am dead, release the pages." Below, several of Vittorio's own men hesitated. In a world like theirs, hesitation was earthquake. Vittorio fired at the booth. Glass exploded beside my head. I ducked. Dante used the half-second to cover the stairs and slam his uncle into the catwalk rail hard enough to dent metal. Their fight was brutal because it was quiet. No wild swings. No shouted hatred. Two men who knew exactly where to hurt the other and had spent years being shaped by the same hand. Vittorio moved faster than his age allowed. Dante hit harder than grief should have let him. I reached the catwalk from the opposite stairs just as Vittorio tore a knife free and drove it toward Dante's side. "Dante!" He turned with the warning, not enough to avoid the blade entirely, but enough that it slid shallow across the old scar instead of deep into the organ below. Then Dante did the thing that cost him. He had Vittorio pinned. He could have left it to the men below. Could have had witnesses and procedure and all the distance powerful families use to disguise murder as governance. Instead, he took the flattened bullet from his pocket, pressed it into Vittorio's palm, and said in a voice so low I barely heard it, "You had one son killed and tried to make me the other version of you." Vittorio smiled bloodily. I succeeded. Maybe that was why Dante pulled the trigger himself. The shot cracked once. Final. Intimate. No speech after. Vittorio folded to the catwalk floor with the bullet still in his hand. Below us, the last of his loyalists either dropped their weapons or died trying not to. Dante stood over his uncle breathing hard. Something in his face was gone. Not humanity. Some thinner hope he had carried without admitting it. I crossed the last steps and put my hand over the cut in his side. Warm blood came through immediately. He looked at me as if returning from very far away. "It's over," I said, because someone had to say it first. His hand covered mine. Heavy. Certain. Broken in ways I now understood. It is over. Behind us, dawn came through the broken skylights and made the dust look almost holy. Nothing about it felt clean. After war, the house made strange room for quiet. Not peace. Quiet. Men stopped running in the halls. Phones rang less often. Paolo's mother planted rosemary by the side garden because Marta said grief should at least smell useful. Enzo healed badly and proudly. Gianni resumed complaining about geese with enough confidence to suggest he believed in a future again. Dante was the only one who seemed slower to return. The wound at his side closed. The shadows under his eyes did not. He took meetings, reorganized routes, buried Vittorio with public dignity and private refusal. He never spoke about the catwalk unless I asked directly, and when I did, he answered without excuses and then went silent like a man who thought truth should be sufficient punishment. One evening, I found him in the library staring at the repaired ledger pages I had mounted in archival sleeves. You hate that I made them useful, I said. He looked up. I hate that your hands had to touch any of this. My hands are fine. That's not what I meant. I knew. That was the problem. I had moved into the East Wing by then without either of us naming when the guest room stopped being temporary. My father's missile rested on the side table, spine repaired but scar intentionally visible. I had left it that way because restoration is not the same thing as pretending damage never happened. Dante noticed everything except his own need. 3 weeks after Halstead, he found me in the kitchen at midnight making tea because sleep had become unreliable. Rain ticked at the windows. The big house had gone soft around the edges. Marta had left almond cake under a cloth with a note for Johnny that read, "1 slice, a liar." Dante stood in the doorway in shirt sleeves, his side bandage visible through the thin linen where it pulled. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he crossed the room and sat at the kitchen table like a man choosing a witness. "I have something for you," he said. He set down a small box, not velvet, gray archival board, corners neatly folded. I stared at it, then at him. "You made a ring box out of conservation board?" I asked Johnny what people usually use. He said velvet. I just liked the idea. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. His mouth changed by a fraction. It nearly counted as relief. I opened the box. Inside was my mother's ring. Not because he had bought it, because he had found it in a sealed envelope among my father's things and had the bent prongs repaired without changing the worn gold. "It belonged to her," I whispered. "I know." I looked up slowly. Dante's hands were flat on the table. Empty. That struck me harder than if he had reached. He would not make this feel like possession, not after all the ways it had started that way anyway. "I am not good at clean things," he said. "I'm not offering you one. No fairy tale, no performance. Just the truth, set down where I could pick it up or not. I can give you my name publicly, if you want the protection that comes with it. Or I can give you a separate house, separate accounts, separate choices, and be the man who comes when you call but does not ask for more." He drew a breath. "What I can't seem to do is imagine this life now without you in it." Everything in me went quiet. "Dante," he shook his head once. "Let me finish." So I did. "When I saw you at that grave, I thought your father had left me the cruelest kind of debt, a good woman in reach of my world." His gaze held mine with exhausting steadiness. "I know better now. He left me the only thing that ever made me want to be harder on myself than the world already was." I realized then that he was not asking whether I loved him. He knew. What he did not know was whether love could survive full knowledge and still choose. I slid the ring from the box but did not put it on yet. If I say yes, nothing becomes clean. No. I still hear Paolo's mother crying sometimes. So do I. I forfeited Florence. I know. And I don't know what kind of woman that makes me. That sentence cost me, maybe because it was the one I still could not repair. Dante stood, came around the table, and stopped close enough that I could feel the heat of him without the touch. Another almost. "Even now, it makes you the woman who looked at what this world costs and came back anyway with your eyes open," he said. "I won't call that innocence lost. I think it's courage. I don't understand." My throat burned. I held out my hand. He slid the ring on carefully, as if gold could bruise if handled by the wrong man. Then his fingers stayed around mine for one beat too long. "Say it," I whispered. "What?" "The name." His eyes softened in a way I had once thought impossible. "Little Keeper." Same words, different life. I stepped into him then. Small movement, enormous consequence, and laid my forehead against his chest above the old scar and the new one. He folded around me slowly, like a man still learning he was allowed to hold what he had not destroyed. Outside, one of the geese honked in offended outrage. Johnny's voice floated faintly from the servants' corridor. "Marta, if I die out there, tell my mother I was brave." Marta yelled back, "Tell her yourself and stop provoking birds." I laughed against Dante's shirt. His hand settled at the back of my head. In that kitchen, with cake under a cloth and rain at the windows and the dark still waiting outside the gates, he did not kneel. He stayed, 9 months later, the basil was finally growing. Marta said it was because I talked to it. Johnny said it was because the geese had accepted me as a lesser evil. Rosa said plants respond to routine and not personality, which only made Johnny look more offended. The estate in late spring smelled different from the winter I had first entered it. Through cut grass, stone warmed by sun, rosemary thick along the side path where Paolo's mother still knelt every Thursday, and the sharp green sweetness of basil leaves under my fingertips. The walls remained high. The gates remained armed. What had changed was not the danger, only the shape my body made around it. I had opened a restoration studio in the old carriage house by then, legitimate contracts, church archives, private collections, a few very discreet legal papers that found their way to my table when the Salvatore family needed truth preserved more carefully than lawyers managed. My workbench sat under tall windows. My father's magnifier lamp hung above it. Some afternoons I caught myself humming in the same absent way he used to, and the grief that followed no longer knocked me to my knees every time. Some days it still tried. On the anniversary of his death, Dante drove me to the cemetery without an escort car. That was how I knew the city had settled into its new hierarchy, or maybe how he wanted me to know he trusted the morning enough to give it to me plainly. The hill looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe all terrible places do once you have survived enough to return standing. The headstone had been cleaned. Fresh lilies lay at the base. The soil around the grave had sunk a little through the seasons, rain pressing it flatter than before. Without thinking, I crouched and smoothed the broken edge where the spring thaw had cracked the line near the flowers. My bare fingers pressed dark earth back into place. For one suspended second, all I heard was birdsong and distant traffic and the soft shift of Dante's shoes in the grass behind me. Then, click. His silver lighter. He lit the candle by the stone and came to stand beside me, black suit, dark glasses in one hand, the lake wind pulling at his tie. When I rose, there was soil on my skin again, just as there had been the first day he saw me. He looked at my hands, and something passed over his face so naked it made my chest ache. "You still do it," he said. "What?" "Protect what can't protect you back." I looked down at the grave. "He's my father." "I know." But that was not all he meant. We both knew it. He took out a folded handkerchief and held it toward me. White linen. The same quiet gesture. This time I smiled before taking it. "What does it cost you?" I asked softly. "When I do that?" He was silent long enough for the question to become dangerous. Then, because he had finally learned that I could bear the truth even when it cut, he answered it. "It makes me want to deserve you," he said, "and some days I still don't know if that's possible." There it was. The one unresolved thing not even love had solved cleanly. I wiped my fingers and tucked the handkerchief into my coat pocket instead of giving it back. He noticed, said nothing. His mouth changed. On the way down the hill, he took my hand. No one around to impress. No need to control a room. Just warm fingers threading through mine like the most ordinary rebellion in the world. Back at the estate, ordinary kept happening. Marta shouted because Johnny had eaten the top layer off the tiramisu for structural reasons. Enzo, still scarred and impossible, brought ledgers to my studio and pretended not to enjoy my corrections. Rosa left prenatal vitamins on the kitchen counter for Paolo's widow because life, offensively, kept making room for itself. In the carriage house, sunlight lay across old paper and gold leaf, and the repaired spine of my father's missal. That afternoon, Dante came to the studio doorway and watched me work on a 17th century parish register with a torn baptism page. I felt him before I saw him. Not by sound, by that shift in stillness that had become one of the truest things in my body. "I thought you had a meeting," I said. "I did. And it bored me." I smiled without looking up. A tragedy. I laid a thin bridge of tissue across the tear, feathered the edges, and let the page rest under weight. Strongest where you stop forcing the fibers flat. Still true. He came to stand behind me, not touching. Almost. Always, almost first, even now. "Dinner at 8, he said, "with the capos." No, with me. I turned on the stool. That sounds suspiciously like a date. It is. For a mafia boss, you ask very little. His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth, then returned to my eyes. For a woman who came back through my gates by choice, I've learned not to waste words. I reached for him first with only my hand, because some parts of me still stayed exactly who I had been. My fingers caught his and held. Good, I said. He bent and kissed my forehead, the lightest thing, still the one that undid me fastest. When evening came, the geese started honking near the kitchen garden, and Johnny shouted, "Marta, your feathered assassins are unionizing again." Her answer carried through the open windows. Then negotiate better. I laughed so hard I had to set down my wine. Dante watched me with that quiet expression he got only in unguarded moments, as if joy in this house still surprised him. Maybe it always would. Maybe that was part of loving a man who had learned life through violence, and now had to relearn it through repetition, through dinners kept, through candles lit for the dead, through hands offered without demand. Later, in bed, with the windows open to the lake wind and the whole dangerous city still turning beyond the walls, he brushed his knuckles once over the ring on my hand and said the name that had crossed every version of us. Sleep, little keeper. Warm now. Entirely warm. I did, and yet here is the truth I still live with. The one love did not sand smooth. I chose him knowing exactly what his world had already cost other people. I chose him after Paolo died, after blood on church stone, after Halstead. I chose him because I saw what he was with me, and because leaving would not have made me untouched again. I still do not know if love can be innocent after that, or only honest. Would you have chosen Dante and let your old life die for it? Or was the price too high, no matter how gently he learned to hold what he loved?